uh, on our object classes. Um, this is definitely going to be, there's some tricky things in here that are super simple if you understood all the other stuff, but you want to make sure you're using them right here. Just to go over basic structure again, most of your instance variables you're going to want to declare up here right at the beginning. These are our instance variables. We're going to want to declare them first thing when we open up the class. That way they're accessible everywhere. Second thing, you want to, for this one, you want to pay careful attention to the user ID because I'm going to show you some things with that. And this it'll be very similar to anything you'd have to do with any other kind of object class. So if we look here, basic structure, we've now seen classes with 3 different constructors. Any object class that you're going to create, you're definitely going to want to include a default constructor. And this one actually has 2 more different constructors. And the reason being that sometimes you would give users a choice. Do you want to add a certain amount of information, or do you not, or do you want to leave that blank, right? This one, I just chose the user avatar. Most user accounts probably wouldn't want you to leave that blank. That wouldn't be the option. But in a lot of things where you're going to set up accounts or you're going to build objects, there's going to be options, and some of them you're going to want to be able to leave blank. That's going to require you to have 2 different regular constructors, and they're really going to and the difference is they have the same name, right? All your constructors are named exactly after the class name, right? The difference, the way that Java differentiates between the 3 is through the use of the parameters. And I'll show you how that works in a second. Just remember that this is different than this because of the parameters. That's why it's allowed to do that, okay? This is called overloading, right? When you have 2 constructors that are the exact same except for different levels of parameters, that's what that's called. It's called overloading. Also, we have our modifiers, and ideally with something like this, I didn't go ahead and write them out for you, but ideally with something like this, we would have accessors as well, but I did not write those in for this one. But all of your object classes, so on your labs and everything else, you're definitely going to want to write out accessors for all the individual variables. The one little trick that I wanted to show you with users is that I have this user ID, and if you're noticing, I didn't set a value here in any of the constructors. And the reason why is because setting a user ID requires a generator that's not just it's not just a cookie cutter sort of thing. You kind of need a loop to do it. I chose 10-digit IDs. And if you look at the way I set it up here, I actually couldn't figure out why, but at a certain point when you go over 10 digits, or actually over 9 digits, I think, you end up getting negative results quite a bit, and I couldn't figure out why that was happening. So I just gave it the absolute value at the end to counteract that, so that I'm not getting negative numbers. So now I have this basically generates a legit 10-digit user ID. So the way that I would include that, I already have it declared. So all I have to do in order to initialize it is just run my generator, right? So I can just put ID gen right there. I can call it to run it in each of the constructors, so that anytime I'm creating one of these objects, I just run the ID gen. User ID is already here. It gets initialized and set to a value inside of ID gen. So I don't need to say user ID equals something in here. All I have to do is run ID gen and I'm done. And then again, pay careful attention to modifiers, all that good stuff. Now, the one final thing that I want to go over is the toString method. If I see, let me backtrack. The toString method, in case it was I didn't clarify with you, or it was unclear in the lesson. The toString goes into the object class. I may quit if I see another toString method inside of your main. It's very disheartening. So please, toString is something that belongs to all objects in Java. Every object by default gets a toString method. I'm going to comment this out a little bit to show you what it does by default. Now, what the toString method, and I'll comment one of these out. What the toString method does by default is it prints basic information about an object. So it allows you to just say system out print line object name. Okay. So if you just print object name directly, you should get information back. And by default, what you get is, forgot to save this. By default, what you get is this hash code, right? It's just a default response to the toString method that lets you know that toString is there and that your object is working properly. But if we wanted to actually generate a response that we can use, we have to do something called overriding. And what overriding is we take a method that it's inherited from the object class, right? So because our object is an actual object, and every class that you're ever going to write in Java belongs to that object class, because we get this inherited, we can do something called overriding, which we would say, don't use the toString. What we're doing here by writing a new toString is we're telling Java, don't use the default toString, use this one and print this information out instead when I run that toString. Now, the other thing that is really frustrating to see is when you guys will say object.toString. I really don't want to see that. It's completely unnecessary. All you have to, it runs by default if you just print the object directly, okay? So now that I have told it what to print, right, I should get some pretty cool information back. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you, if you're working in Notepad++ still, if you hit Control-Shift-S, it saves all, it runs a save on all the tabs you have open. When we're working with multiple files like this, you want to make sure that you are operating with the saved version of any of the files that you're working with. So if I ran this and I didn't save everything that I just did here, if I didn't run save, it would run the previous version of that file. So just make sure before you run any of this stuff, you want to make sure that you're just do a Control-Shift-S to save all your tabs. So you'll see if I run this, I get all the information that was placed into the toString. Okay. All I have to do, system out print line object name. Okay. And you can see here that I only use 2 parameters. So the constructor that's going to run by default is this one. Now, the other thing you'll notice is that I put IDGen in every single one of the constructors. The reason why that needs to happen is that Java at runtime, just like we discussed previously, Java at runtime is going to decide which one of these constructors to use based on the parameters that we put in. So if I only put in 2 parameters, it's going to use this one. And if I only have IDGen in the default, IDGen never runs and we don't get an ID number. So be careful of that. Make sure if something's got to run and it's common to any type of object that you're going to create, make sure that you put it in all of your constructors if you have multiples. So you can see here, Java decided at runtime, I'm going to use the one with 2 parameters because he only gave me 2 values in there. But if I do another one, if I create another object and I put in 3 parameters, it'll give me a defined avatar, right? So what it's doing is saying, here I'm going to decide to use this constructor, but since he gave me 3 values here, on the second run, I'm going to use this constructor. Does that make sense? Does everybody get what toString does and how it works? Again, it's just a default value, and by default, it's going to give you that hash code. But if we override it like this, we can actually tell it what to print for us. So you'll see this used a lot in like testing when you're testing out the software or there's a problem. You can put something in the toString and we go, okay, well, let's try this value and see if this works. And then you print something out with the toString. Okay. And I think that's it. Questions?